Welcome to the July SAFe meetup, Sydney SAFe meetup. This time around, we'll talk about navigating complexity with collaborative lean portfolio management. Morten will be our speaker. He'll initiate discussion, and as always, the major value is in the discussion that follows. Welcome to the meetup, because this is something we try to emphasize always, that we're here to learn, practice, share the war stories. So this meetup is for those interested in learning and sharing their stories on how to scale their agile implementation using SAFe. We started a long time back, so past 9 years now. And at our first meetup, we said, okay, guys, what is this meetup about? Because there's a lot of info coming from SAFe. So in our case, our meetup is about meeting people who do SAFe every day and exchanging experiences, helping troubleshoot and solve each other's specific problems, discuss and clarify advanced concepts, and most importantly, have fun with SAFe. What we are not doing, we are not here about agile basics, SAFe training, although we can point out to a lot of providers, and also SAFe bashing. So if you don't like SAFe, please refrain yourself. We are here to learn how to use it, not point out any things that you think why it's not good. So if this is what you want to do, you're in the right spot. And don't forget that you can open the discussion too. We would love to hear your experiences with SAFe. So doesn't matter how small, doesn't matter how much you think it's irrelevant, you'll be surprised how many people actually are having the same problems or facing the same challenges, and your experience might actually help someone tremendously. So please reach out, meetup, LinkedIn, and we would love for you to do this. It's very quick to get started. This and all meetups are also recorded, and we have a YouTube channel. Please vote for the YouTube channel. Just go and search Sydney SAFe meetup, and you will see this with all the recordings from past meetups. And today's talk is very, very specific for SAFe LPM, and what would happen if it meets Cynefin, so the sense-making framework. So it's basically extending what SAFe LPM does into areas that Cynefin defines. So we'll hear how basically we can reuse SAFe LPM in those areas and what adjustments we need to do. Now, Morten is a specialist in agile and lean strategy, product services, and technology delivery. He has worked with platforms, product, service teams, and all sizes to gain better results with less hassle, both as a consultant, as an employee. And he also holds a Master of Science and PhD in software engineering. So really, stellar background with lots of experience that we want to hear about. Before we begin, a couple of things, guys. The presentation is being recorded. I mentioned that. Please stay on mute during the presentation. During the presentation, please ask a question or post them in the chat box. Morten would love to stop and discuss, but there'll be also Q&A at the end. We may have to go past the hour, and we will address many of those questions. If not, we'll try to reach out. Any other questions before we begin, guys? Any other questions? If not, Morten, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me just get the presentation up and working. Always a little bit excited about this part. Is it showing well?
Perfect.
Perfect. So, Michael, thank you so much for the presentation, or for the invitation, of course. This is actually a bit of a special time for me, because it's the end of a 2-month period where I've been traveling Europe and the universe online, offering presentations on a topic very close to this. And tomorrow is my 60 years birthday. So I was actually reflecting how old is SAFe, and I think
Congrats.
SAFe is close to not being a teenager anymore. I met it first when I worked with Nokia. It's not something which is a big part of the story anymore, but Dean Leffingwell actually worked with our teams. I was not myself directly involved at the time, but I did host a meetup with Dean in Nokia House in Espoo, and 2 persons showed up. It was back in the mid zeros. So I think times have been changing since then. Lots of evolution. And like I think you introduced really well, Mikhail, my talk is based on having actually worked with SAFe LPM just when it came out in 2019, and of course also since then. And the process of making that work with a larger company, infused with my own experience from especially Nokia, but also other places, meant that there were a few things where we felt that we could evolve a bit, not to change what was, because that actually works quite well in the context where it's in, but a few things that came to our mind. So this is what I wanted to talk about. And you mentioned Cynefin. So yes, Cynefin will show up. It's already on the front page. So I also want to say that Dave Snowden, who I know rather well, so we meet now and then when we have a chance in events and etc. So I'm not sure he's totally in agreement with everything I have been doing. However, it has helped me reflect on what I have been doing. So in that sense, I think it's fully valid. And like you said, Michael, I'm totally happy with whatever kind of conversation and challenge. Don't be shy. So what I wanted to do is to start with a recap of SAFe LPM. It's going to be super brief. And then I wanted to take you into my line of thought, all within the time we have left in the 30 minutes. So I hope we can do that.
Just to double check, guys, can you see Morten's screen? Perfect.
So, in the spirit of interactivity, and joking that SAFe is almost 20, I'm not sure that's actually true, depends on your counting, but it's at least a teenager who is well of a certain age. But SAFe LPM is optimized for what? What is SAFe LPM optimized for?
Flow.
Exactly. It's almost a giveaway, right? Because when you look at the big picture, and I hope I have not been breaking any rules by just taking a few screenshots from the portal, but all links are here. So when you look at the portfolio level, it's really about optimized for flow. And very prominent in the picture is sort of the middle where I will show the Kanban in a second. But one thing I also wanted to observe is that strategy is actually not part of the picture. So it starts with something called strategic themes, which of course are distilled out of strategy or even strategies as a way of operationally guide the delivery of the portfolio, which is typically made out of epics. Then the funnel or the Kanban of how the epics flow through. I think that's the crux of everything in this version. And then you have the collaborations, which I suppose you are familiar with, in how what happens, what are the dynamics around creating portfolio flowing things through the Kanban, the funnel. I plan to leave it at this. I just wanted to have it potentially for later reference if we have some more conversations. But for me, this is Scaled Agile Framework, LPM on steroids. You agree? That's it, right? It's actually super simple. Then what I wanted to do is that I wanted to just invite you to what I call a complex view. And I didn't plan to go into the details of Cynefin. We can if you want. But basically, you can say there is a huge distinction between what you call the ordered world, the causal world, the world where business cases actually work, versus the unordered world where you never know what happens next. And these two babies somehow become the what do you call it? Personas of the different situations. So you have Pelle, the elephant. You can almost hear strong, trustworthy, loves long days, hard work, but doesn't really like change too much, right? So this is a thing of strength and who can hold position well and carry the weight. Then you have Vilma, the hippo. You have no idea what happens next. It's the type of person who wrecks the party and eats all the candy and spoils the furniture and all of that. And there's always some speed, direction. Well, maybe that's an exaggeration, but it's a world of dynamics, whereas the other world is a world of position. So what I wanted to do is to invite you to the question, Michael already mentioned it, what would actually happen if you took SAFe Agile Framework LPM and invited it out to play with Cynefin? What kind of thoughts would that trigger? And to tease it out a little bit, you can say that the model suggests different situations for the things we typically like, speed and innovation. So you can say the clear mountain view, or maybe the little bit more curvy landscape, but where maps still works and there are roads you can drive on, to the road, sandy road to the beach, where you don't really know where is the road and where is the beach, to the sort of situation where you suddenly find yourself submerged in water and all you can think about is getting out and breathe again, to the situations which are somehow in between and is a little bit confusing if you're at the beach or in the mountain, etc. So there are these different situations that we can relate to. Then, and again, I mean, I assume that I'm preaching a little bit for the choir. So if in that sense that if there's something which you want me to slow down, let me know. But here's then a view on what is collaborative lean portfolio management, as I will be talking about. And collaborative means something different than the SAFe Agile Framework collaborations, but still play on the same word. So just to give you a bit of a semantic breakdown on the what, how, and why, then for me, a portfolio is everything we do. It's all the people, all the work. One thing you often observed around the budget, at least I have observed that with a few clients when I worked as a consultant, that when we start talking about the budget, they say a little bit, what do you mean? I mean, they're sitting here drinking my coffee. It's all about what we agree to do, but the budget is kind of fixed here and now. So everything we do, all the people, all the work. Then lean, traditionally one view of lean is to say that's about reducing waste. I think here we can think about it as minimizing wasted opportunity in a portfolio context. By the way, if you wonder why I'm all the time looking upright to the heaven, that's because that's where you are and my presentation is here. So I hope it's not too disturbing. Then collaborative, what does that mean? Well, it's everyone together, open. Lately, I have looked at open strategy as an extension of this. I'll not talk so much about it today, but this idea of open, everybody together, everyone is really important. And then the healthiness, we actually will talk about things like balance risk, balance spend, load, position, that things are healthy and well balanced is very important. Then on the approach, so the approach is based on accountable contributions. And one accountable contribution would be an epic owner responsible for delivering an epic, or at least championing an epic through the organization. So each of these contributions under a portfolio is based on strong accountability. And then you can say, okay, so SAFe Agile Framework LPM optimized for flow. Strategy is not a first-class citizen. What's this approach? Well, this approach is one which is actually optimized for absorbing surprises. So the mantra I suggest is manage at the speed where you can afford to lose. So fast, but not faster than that. And strategy is invited as a first-class citizen. So that's something you actively work with as part of your daily operation. So surprises, what do they look like and where do they come from? And first of all, the nature of a surprise is that you can only be surprised now. Okay, otherwise it doesn't make sense. Then it's not a surprise. You cannot be surprised yesterday and you cannot be surprised tomorrow. Maybe this is surprising for you, but that surprise came right now. And people often confuse that, for example, with the long-term view. So it's actually possible to be surprised about something, that has an impact 30 years from now. Okay, you can say, OMG, never heard of the electrical cars, deep in oil and gas. Let's get out of there. That's something you learn now, but maybe some of your investments were planned for new oil rigs 30 years from now. But the typical form of surprises is one of these, the bubble, something that grows on you, maybe the boiling frog thing. In Denmark, we have the emperor's new clothes, Hans Christian Andersen, which is a good example of someone who suddenly finds out that the dress code is not exactly, or his dressing is not to the code of what people expect. In the case of the fairy tale, a bit laughable. Then the sudden shifts, the weather changes, that means things just changing around. COVID is a good example. Supplier going bust could be another example. And then you have the new opportunities, the serendipity events that just makes you learn about new opportunities, something you can do different. It doesn't actually matter so much what the surprises are. It matters most to see them, but it's still interesting to know a little bit what kind of forms can they take. If you can think of something different than these, I'm happy to hear about it. So give that a think. I can see we are losing some people, and that's totally okay. But are the rest of you okay? Good. Otherwise,
I think
let me
we're
know.
still 11. It just
Okay, good. Well, always good with a short check. So in that sense, when you think about portfolio management, that's really about aligning strategy to execution. It's almost two words for the same thing, at least in the context that I have found myself. So one of the questions you need to ask from a dynamic perspective is that as things emerge, you align to be able to realign and stay on your strategy. So it almost becomes a bit of a paradoxical thing, because you don't expect the alignment to be static. You actually expect it to change, but to be able to change, you need to maintain a constant state of alignment, even if what you're aligned to change over time. I hope that makes sense. So this idea of staying on strategy, preserving a state of alignment, or even you can say be reconciled on what the strategy you're pursuing is, becomes super important. So have a look on the thought process I went through, and I'm doing this a bit fast. Happy to pause on the different elements. But basically, this idea of taking LPM out to play with Cynefin, you could say, let's try to go with some of the ideas from the complex world of decomposing and recombining. So if we try to decompose the portfolio conversation, I'll show the details a bit on the next slide. But you say, let's try to decompose the portfolio conversation into the fundamental questions. What would they look like? Let's try to take the portfolio conversation and defragment it. What I found is that portfolio strategy in organizations are discussed in many places. So there are many people discussing it, typically in smaller context. And very often part of that conversation is, what are the other guys talking about? So if we could somehow, and this is number 3, so if we could take this conversation that's spread everywhere and just make one conversation, then you would get something that's very much like the PI planning, but without the planning. And then you can say, when we look at the fundamental questions, if you recombine those into a number of new collaborations, it would be the tree that I show here. So that's a bit of the logic behind it, but let's look in a bit more detail what's in it. And interestingly, the most important question I came up with is the number 8, which basically means, can you sleep at night? Or is there some tension that's nagging you, something unresolved, something where you don't really feel that you're doing the right thing? Then you got to work on it. And that's pretty much the definition of how do you deal with tension. When it gets too high, you got to figure out what to do with it. So the more direct questions that you would ask then is, do we have the right objectives? Do we have the right team to deliver the objectives we have set out for ourselves? Are we having the right spread of our investments? Do we have the money on the right bets? Number 3. When you then look at this on a timeline, do you then see the right things come back? Do you see the right contributions when you look at your roadmap? Is that actually playing out as you're expecting it to do? Number 5 is about the healthiness. So are we doing too much? Do we spend the money like we want to do it? What's the risk exposure versus our risk appetite? Is that well balanced? And then finally, the more dynamic part is that, is there something new that we see that we need to act to? Should we do something different based on what we just observed and tag on to another strategy than the one we are pursuing at the moment? And then we are back to number 8. And these questions have been stable for a while. Maybe you see a different one. Would love to hear about that as well. But in my head, you come pretty well around that portfolio conversation.
Yeah, if you can
already
go back
Yeah.
for just a second. Just to clarify this, as you had on the very first intro on the LPM for SAFe, strategy usually comes from the business.
Yeah.
Does this mean we basically have to have a seat on that business table where strategy is defined?
So you can say yes, in a sense. These days, I'm a big fan of something called open strategy, which builds on transparency and inclusion. So far, the open strategy community has mainly been focused on strategizing, and the act of deliberations is still not delegated. So it would still be the top of the organization that finally decides on a strategy. What I'm suggesting is to think this more in a way that the leaders of the organization, their job is to disrupt and enable, but the actual work is conducted by the operational part of the organization. And part of that is the act of distilling out what strategy are we actually following. So yes, top leaders have a say on what strategy is, but there is a more open process around challenging it and changing it. Of course, ultimately, as I said in the beginning, accountability is a very big part of this. And I don't think everything can be delegated. So some of the more fundamental choices will still go upwards, but the more sort of adjustments to the strategy could basically be just on an informed basis that we would do this rather than that. That's okay. So
Well,
in principle, no. In practice, yes.
Yep. Abby, sorry. Abby, you have a question?
Just a quick one, Morten. Organizations needs a bit of a stability at the top level. So you could be fluid down at the PI planning level or team level. But at the top level, they've got their own people, they've got their own, trusted advisors, etc. So how do we see that at the top level strategy to be an open strategy concept? You can't invite every Tom, Dick, and Harry to discuss about it. Otherwise, it will be a flow of people, which potentially will result in no conclusion. So what's your thinking on that?
Yeah, well, it's not actually my thinking. So I think this part is actually well described, and you're right. So it's one of the classical and of course valid concerns that you raise. Digital tools today are super helpful for organizing a lot of people getting involved in the process of strategizing. And I think from our community, we have a wonderful example yourself. So the example I most often refer to is that, and I think you all know this, at the end of the first day of the PI planning, when all the teams tell what do objectives look like for us, that's actually a little piece of near-term strategy that surfaced right there. And then what happens overnight, you know this, right? When the guys go to the bar, the big guys go to the room and discuss about what they just heard, and then they come back and say, well, this is wonderful, and we would like to do a little bit less of this and a little bit more of that, because otherwise we think we are missing some fundamental marks. So the whole idea of distilling out the objectives, in my reading, and I hope everyone agree, is to get a view to how does work reconcile with higher level objectives at the end of the first day of planning. You agree to this? So I think that's a wonderful example. So again?
I get what you're saying. No doubt and no conflict in that. I was just wondering at that level, not at the scale agile, but in general, you mentioned about open strategy. So not even at PR planning level, but just when we're kicking off the strategy thing, and the open strategy talks about transparency, alignment, etc. People might not be comfortable at that level to involve everybody into dialogues, right? And how do we control that?
No, so yeah, so super good point as well. So I believe that one of the things that actually scare leaders away from open strategy is that there is this perception of it's a democratization process. It's a bit exotic, and that's actually true. So I agree with that. But what happens is that when you look at the complex side, where you have no idea what happens next, that actually forces openness, not for everybody to have a view, but for everybody to have an idea of what deviations are relevant for the strategy. So you can say the essence of transparency is not that you know the strategy. The essence of transparency is that when you see something changing, you can assess the relevance for the strategy, whether you should report that back or not.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So, and well, thanks for asking, because I think this is actually the crux of it. So thanks for helping bringing this out. It also raises then an interesting conversation between the cost of delay versus what I call opportunity cost. And I'm still thinking about this, but my view is that opportunity cost actually offers a much more practical way of choosing, because it's basically for everyone. Should I stop what I'm doing and help a colleague, or should I pursue the opportunity that I'm working on at the moment? That's like a trade-off based on opportunity cost. What serves the common good better? So in that sense, that you could distill transparency down to this essential question: are you able to opportunity cost your own choices? That's for me the essence of transparency. And then the inclusion becomes that if you see something, would you be able to report that back unfiltered? Already covered this. So these three things are basically then the new collaborations. Clarify intent is exactly what you just asked about. It's about the view to the strategy. Where are we heading? Then the build fitness is whether the teams can carry the weight of that strategy. And aligning contributions is pretty much PI planning, but without planning. So that's the dynamic reconciliation between intent and contribution as you tag along. And there are some steps here suggested to get started. I don't want to go too much into all of them. Just to give you the idea, align contributions, it's a refined form of PI planning. On the clarify intent, OKRs is a wonderful language to get started. And then on the build fitness, the question I always ask is that, do you have a useful collaborative structure? And then I encourage teams to think about what does that actually mean, and how well do they then comply with their own criteria. So that's a good way to break the ice of this conversation. We have a lot of experience of how to do this, and you can actually do it pretty fast, because it's all about standing up a conversation in the first place. So here it looks like a 9-month timeline, but in reality, you can use these ideas also for turnaround. So you can, within a week, you can get a pretty good view on what everybody is thinking and doing about whatever crisis you are solving, and find a way to involve the right people. Obviously, this doesn't pull out any fires, but when the fire is pulled out and you need to get back on whatever track you want to get on, this is a super effective technique to do this. So where does it work? Well, it works for large organizations to become more straight on the strategy. It helps for scale-ups to figure out where do we actually scale. So my suggestion is that you are better off scaling on portfolios than people, work, and dependencies. And as I said, it can also be used for crisis. I think this is a good place to stop for the debate or conversation. If you want to know more, then the lowest thing here is quite accessible. You can pick that up as a PDF, and that's actually including, in a strategy context, everything we talked about. Also offering a new semantic definition of portfolios, which essentially is a bag of epics. But even that is a bit of an overstructure, because essentially a portfolio is a set of risk positions and they can take other forms than the one you know from the release trains and the portfolio backlog. So it gives you a bit of a broader view. Thank you.
Just a note, guys, on my LinkedIn post, I actually added the link to this presentation, but I'll paste it in here in the chat as well. Any questions? Otherwise, I can fire a couple. Maybe I find my first one. Can you go back 2 slides, Morten? You had that frequency 1 to 2. That's one. 1 to 2 weeks.
No, these are not. These are not. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. Yes. 1 to 2 weeks. Sorry. Ask a question.
Can you clarify this? So basically, does this mean we're halfway through a PI and suddenly something pops up and we have to basically exactly go through the 4 steps? Can you clarify this a bit? How it will work?
Yeah. So I would say that the proposal on this one is, and it might be very controversial, but I still think it has merit, is that I have met a lot of organizations who have tensions around the 3-month PI period. I mean, their reality is simply running faster than that clock cycle. And I think it's a bit of an unfortunate piece of history because the PI planning is so iconic in the SAFe story that you cannot basically do SAFe without doing PI planning. This is actually a proposal to soften that up as an evolution. So I would say that what the evolution is that you can off-cycle the planning, but you got to dig in hard on the alignment, which for me has always been the essential second purpose of the PI planning, even to the level where that's the one that really made a lot of it work. So what I mean here is that to start up on this is that if you accept this idea of doing the alignment of contributions as a strategy conversation, as a portfolio conversation, that you can stand up in 1 to 2 weeks time. And if you have a crisis, I mean, you can even do it instantly. But normally this works the best if people come well prepared and have had even conversations before.
Gotcha. Cool, thank you.
So Morten, how do you contrast that with at the portfolio level in SAFe, right? There are a series of sync meetings that are part of the LPM process, right? So the portfolio sync, the participatory budgeting, there's a couple of different, alignment meetings up there that are really meant to align the portfolio around the progress that they're making, the up and coming work to be done.
Yeah, so I think and I hope this is okay. So my main reflection on this is that we are in the middle of a huge downfall of agile. I myself just left my job a few months ago, and I think it's in part due to that huge change. And I really think we got to ask ourselves if we have been scaling on the right things or if we have been positioning this right. So what I have seen is that we have positioned agile as something that deals with people, teams, work, and dependencies. And through that, we learned the world how to become predictability. For me, that's the amazing contribution of what Dean and the rest of you did with the Scaled Agile framework. And I know back in the zeros, that was the #1 problem for the senior vice presidents at Nokia, was that the mobile phones that were supposed to hit the Christmas tree were launched in April, right? So it was just unpredictable and they burned all the marketing money. But we have moved on from that. So the question is now, knowing all of this, how do you really think about this? And this is where I suggest that rather than thinking of the portfolio as the top of the cherry for the flow optimization, why not think of it as an economic view of risk positions and break it down from there? So if you think of it as cost for work, risk of future value, and load balancing across your different options, then that's the essence of the economic portfolio management. And this is how this is built up. And then you can say, well, for the collaboration suggested by LPM, I think, yes, they have merit and they tie very, very well to the story of the release train level and the solution train level. Sorry, I might be using old words, but it's still the same levels. So it builds very well on that story. I'm feeling that why not turn it around and start the story from how do you manage an organization? how do you make sure that you disperse money and hold your risk appetite at the right level with the engagements that you make. So it's not contradictions, I would say. It's different views that leads to different conclusions. And a lot of the elements, if not all of what you have in the original SAFe LPM collaborations, of course, they are there because they are things that needs to be done. But this gives you a less fragmented point of view.
Okay, that's cool. So the essentially you're saying, you know, this is a collaboration not within the portfolio, but across the portfolios?
Well, the thing is that you can, if you think about it, then what is a portfolio? It's a bag of risk positions, but each risk position could be in many portfolios. So it doesn't force you to have like a complete disjoint but complete view, right? You can look at this from many perspectives. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but the point is that you can. I still think the essential thing is to see this as an evolution of the backlog-driven way of working that we have seen so far, but also where, and maybe that's back to my point, just to make it perfectly said, I believe that the downfall of Agile is due to the fact that we never really had a full transfer of accountability. I mean, the money, the strategy, the big decisions always stayed on the other side of the line. This is a way to operate at that line between the money, the big decisions, and the strategy, and what that means for execution.
I hear what you're saying about the downfall. You know, Agile, you know, has certainly plateaued a little bit and has a decline, but I think a lot of that is the way people have implemented Agile. They've very rarely ever gotten to a portfolio space, right? So
Well, that's exactly my point. It's like it's the adults, right? And then the kids do Agile. I wrote a poem about that.
Something slightly above that. I mean, the whole purpose of some of the broader frameworks, including SAFe, was, you know, especially for us, was to reposition the portfolio, you know, as a place where lean behaviors take place more than agile behaviors.
Yeah. No, exactly. So it's actually a mystery for me why strategy is not a first-class citizen.
Well, depends what you're looking for strategy. I mean, strategy is there in the framework. So, I mean, I like what you're saying about the risk positions and things like that. I think that makes for an interesting, you know, thought bubble around how the portfolio collaborates and the way they, you know, maybe how the way they use the Kanban as, you know, work to be done. But the strategy positions, you know, the top triangle you showed before really shows a collaboration between, you know, the enterprise level executives and your portfolio level executives to determine, you know, well, you know, how are they transmitting or how are they advocating the enterprise's strategy to the portfolios. And if you read the portfolio,
I think, absolutely. And I think the classical argument is that if that works for you, then don't change it.
Yeah, look, I mean, all of this is meant to be experimental, right? So, you know, and SAFe's not meant to be, you know, follow to the rule. If you want to try experiments and things work, then try them, and if they work, then go ahead and do that. You know, it's just as long as you get the outcomes you're really looking for. But I think strategy is present. You know, it's present there between the enterprise and that. And what may be less clear is where does strategy take place inside the portfolio. And really, that's meant to be around that portfolio canvas and the work that they do there, right? But I think the work.
So if you're interested, I have some time on my hands at the moment, so I'm super interested to meet some of you and your colleagues and have this conversation. I think this is a genuine proposal for how to soften up some of the hard constraints that's biting. I mean, we totally solved the problem of predictability with the scaled agile framework approach, and it's a wonderful contribution. But where it's hitting some hard barriers at the moment is it doesn't really soften up to the demands of complexity. So, for example, the reliance on the PI planning as the only form of alignment and coordination might not stand the test of time. I actually have a whiskey bet out on that. It's not happened yet, but I believe we just have to see some evolution there. And the classical approach, of course, still have merit. If it works, it works. But it's also the one thing that you hear people talk about when you enter larger organizations. They have a need to evolve their practices around that, and they offer very little guidance.
Yeah, look, I think, PI planning, as you said, is the stalwart behavior, right? It's what starts the work for a 10 or 12 or 8-week period. But there are various sync events that take place at the train level, at the art level. You got your PO sync, you've got your architecture sync, you've got, various sync events, you've all got your demos, your system demos and your team level demos. There's plenty of sync meetings that take place. But I mean, I can somewhat see what you're saying about, should we be so reliant on just, a 1-2 day meeting? But it depends. I mean, the purpose of that 2-day meeting is to set the agenda, or, a rough plan for the next 10 weeks.
Yeah. But so I think bottom of this, and it's very important for me to emphasize this, is that this is not actually, in that sense, a criticism. I think it's an evolutionary question.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, then flow is actually in itself an efficiency measure. And it's almost like the undiscussable, because flow is so much on top of why we do lean and agile that it's just got to be good, but it really is an efficiency measure. So if you flow the wrong thing fast, then you are still not in a nice place. So that's why it becomes so super important to counter that with absorbing surprises, which immediately means that you will not be flow efficient in a way that's the only thing you optimize for.
Yeah.
It's got to be, and it is already built into the framework. We talk about the set-based approach, which is not flow efficient, right? Unless you think of flow of options, but then that's not really what we talk about. So there is a conversation to be had around this, where I think the world is really craving for guidance.
I want to give other people a chance here. I've noticed Sandeep's had his hand up for a little while, so I want to make sure he gets in.
Oh, but I'm counting on Mihail to be the tough facilitator.
Oh, I just wanted this to complete. Thanks, Jared. Sandeep.
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Morten. That was a very interesting presentation. Absolutely enjoyed it. Two kind of related questions, and more I'd like to hear from you, your thoughts. I know you called the session as collaborative lean portfolio management. For me, there is no portfolio management, whether lean or otherwise, without collaboration, because I can't really do portfolio management sitting in my own cubicle and do. That was one. I just wanted to hear your thoughts. And second is, worked in few organizations, and I've had struggle in the whole SAFe LPM. So SAFe at an art level, a lot of organizations have embraced it. But when you get to the LPM, that's the portfolio management happens at the exec level. So you got to bring in C-suite to actually help in the decision making, whether it's participatory budgeting or any of those events. Unless there's an organization which has embraced SAFe through and through, and I have struggled working in some of the public sector organizations. There are parts of the organization which embrace SAFe, but not the whole, top to bottom. So, what have you seen in terms of the actually implementing LPM? So both, just wanted to hear your thoughts on.
Wonderful question. So on the first one is an easy one, because if you do the opposite test, non-collaborative, right? That doesn't make any sense. So you can say, let's throw that word away, but I'm not going to do that. But you can. So that I give you. Then so it's super interesting what you say, because what we have learned is that it makes a lot of sense to ask in an organization, can you even work together? Can you even collaborate? And then surprisingly often you found out that actually you can't, right? It's a game of smoke and mirrors and politics and game playing and whatever. So these guys are not collaborating. They are actually, in this case, anti-collaborating, which is why my first book was called On Mess. So if people don't even want to collaborate because they are playing games and political things and promoting their own careers, whatever, all kinds of toxic and collaborative behaviors, then you somehow gotta flow through that first and say, how can we establish a useful collaborative structure? And what I found is that most organizations that claim to do agile is already there, but I have also found examples where that was not the case. I mean, I came across an example where someone had handfuls of teams working uncoordinated because they were agile, and it was just a mess. I mean, the person in top had no idea what was going on, and that was the biggest frustration. And no wonder, because there was no cohesion in that setup. There was no like system level alignment built in. So everybody just did whatever they want. So to your point, I would say start with establishing a useful collaborative structure. It's actually first here, if you see it. And there are two things which are enormously important. The one is the sponsorship. So without top level sponsorship, you will die sooner and later. I have felt that on my own body a number of times. Because it's so easy, because where you try to make this work is typically driven by other things than rational things and good for the common great. And when you hit into one of those, unless you have very powerful friends, you are the one who have to leave. And the second one is this idea of having a useful collaborative structure, which is of course continuous improvement. And anything agile, which is more than a name, fits that label really, really well. But to your point, there's also other context, and in that sense, this can open up for the conversation. Normally, it's not that much you have to change, but of course, without trust, which typically can be built through sponsorship and determination to do this, you can make a lot of progress in a short time.
And in fact, you may have seen in other countries, but in both state and federal public sector, in Australia, generally the decisions are very waterfallish. So you write a business case, very traditional portfolio management. It just, the way public sector works is not really nicely, it leans towards a lean portfolio management in any case, because they're asking for some very, very big business cases to be written up front, where you got to know everything before you write that business case. And as we know, most of the business cases.
So what I see in the public sector in Denmark, and you see a lot from the public sector because it's public, so I think these problems replicate quite similarly everywhere. But you see that big projects often fail, and then you have entirely frustrated people because they are asked to do things that they can't possibly do. A little bit the same thing as the downfall of logic, which is actually a huge crisis of well-being and productivity in society. Right? You spend tons of money to do something that never materializes, and you have people coming to work just wishing to go home again because it's too awful to be there. I mean, any modern organization will want to solve these two problems. And this is a pretty good shot at some first steps you can take along these lines, which are very compatible with the sustainability agenda as well, of bringing more innovation, more productivity, and more well-being, which also fuels innovation. So there's some huge systemic powers at play. And we just know, so this is why it's not democracy, which people confuse it with. It's actually a force demanding openness. So you have seen in the agile world this fight between control and freedom, but that's a false dichotomy because it's a paradoxical relationship. Sometimes you need control, sometimes you need freedom, but you don't need only control or only freedom, right? It's like a thing, but openness needs to be fundamental so that information can pass unfiltered.
Again, and if I can have one more liberty of asking one more question, I've actually stepped away from portfolio management. What I found was portfolio management has turned into more portfolio reporting rather than the actual management. And I said, you know what, I don't want to do that admin work where all you're doing is you're collecting data and reporting, and those reports go nowhere. That it just becomes such a useless
exactly
exercise that
I love it.
And I was telling you, I would rather deliver stuff rather than just keep reporting and then those reports go nowhere.
So you see, this is what I try to build in here. And one way I started to explain this is that play with this thought that you would create a meaningful conversation where information would never leave the heads where it rightly belongs. Okay. So rather than having people empty their head and pass it on to someone who tries to figure out what it means and report on something they think is right, how can you put together the right heads for the right conversation? That's what this is all about. So you don't have the handover of information, but you rather have integration of information.
Thank you very much.
Which is actually what you do in a PI planning, if you think about it, right? That's why it works, is that all the right heads are there.
Yeah.
Thanks. Abby, I think you had something. Abby, you there?
No, I think that's okay. A lot of discussions already happened, and mine was not a question, but it was more like a statement which I just wanted to come across. I think more importantly, everybody's talking about challenges, reporting, etc. It all comes down to cultural resistance to change, right? With leadership, existing mindset, and how you overcome inertia. Just shifting from a command and control culture to that embraces decentralization, decision making, and empowerment can be challenging. So it's a human aspect of thing, right? What's in it for me, right? And till we don't really address this sorts of challenges, then there will always be a problem. And this is not something which you can solve it overnight, right? It's an iterative, continuous change, which needs to be diluted as we move ahead.
Well, so I hear what you're saying. I often hear this, and I also actually disagree. So there's an interesting thing at play, which is that generative AI demands work in a digital form, because otherwise it cannot really do what it's good at. But at the same time, with digitization, you also get automation and augmentation, which bites into the bureaucracy of the organization. And remember that bureaucracy is needed and can be good, but there can also be too much of it. But the persons who are the most exposed to changes here are the ones who have been making careers from sort of gating access to people higher in the organization or transporting information. Whereas if you can then find digital solutions for that and new broader collaborations for that, then you can actually open up the organization much more without losing control. It's a different kind of control, but you also all know the illusion of control, which is in you think you control it, but actually you don't, versus what I'm talking about, which will give you a much more directional and dynamic form of control based on actual transparency. Thank you. This has been a wonderful conversation. Anything we can do to land it well in the last minute?
Any more questions? Any more questions from anyone?
So I made a habit to say that everything comes with a lifetime warranty. So anything that troubles you after this, or if you see some possibility for new angles, you are more than welcome to reach out.
Thanks so much, Morten, as well as it sparked my interest into open strategy much more now. I have to go and at least read one or two of the books.
So help spread the word, please. It's a totally growing trend. I was just at the open strategy workshop in Zurich, the first of the kind, mainly ruled by academics. I think there were maybe 10% practitioners there, but it's really trending at the moment. So
just a quick one, Morten, before we just depart, is this open strategy? Is this something similar to holacracy, sociocracy, or something on those grounds?
No, so you can say these sociocracy, holacracy, so they, in my head, they wrong foot a little bit by focusing too much on democracy, which is actually not needed. But when you look at this from a complexity angle, look at Snowden's manual for crisis management. You can pick it up for free if you live in Europe, but I think actually everybody can get it for free. Otherwise, ping me. So he talks about how you deal with crisis, surprises, etc., which is the essence of survivability, is that you need to be able to cope with what meets you, whereas the classical approach is more about drive for value. So we talk about a balance between the two, not one or the other.
Okay. Snowden seems to be a very competent person. I don't know, but he replies to all my messages on LinkedIn.
So he's like a superpower.
I know. So I like to interact with him.
Very generous, actually. So
Yes, certainly.
Cool, guys. If we don't have any more questions, first of all, Morten, thank you so much for this. It was really, really wonderful to explore something different, put it this way. And most of all, we rely on your experience for all these things because you've done them, you lived them, so to speak, which is exactly what our meetup is all about. And thanks to you all guys for attending and for the wonderful discussion. So I think it was really, really a nice meetup. So unless there are more comments.
So where's the bottle of
Questions?
wine? Where's the bottle of wine for Morten, Michael?
Next time I'm in Europe, I'll be face to face. Cool. Thank you so much, guys. Until next time, and don't forget, if you have any idea to discuss like this, please reach out.
Thank you. Bye.
See you later all.